Hi, my name's Gloria Flora. I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable Obtainable Solutions. It's a nonprofit with the mission to ensure the sustainability of public lands and the sustainability of the plant, animal, and the human communities that depend on public lands. I'm also a member of the Northeast Washington Forestry Coalition, a collaborative that's been around since 2001, and we collectively advise the Colville National Forest on appropriate forest management practices that all of us, members of industry, conservationists, citizens, can all agree that we feel is most appropriate for our lands, most scientifically accurate, and will provide the best opportunity for restoration and revitalization of our public lands.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. Folks, this is Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and we are out here in Stevens County, that's eastern Washington, where a lot of logging is going on. And today we're going to focus on private lands that are being sold to the largest lumber company in the world that has purchased private lands, and in my opinion is totally devastating them when there are better ways for them to do things. And that's why I have invited Gloria to speak out, because she knows a lot about permaculture and the more natural way to deal with these kind of timber sales. So, Gloria, behind you we have a state DNR, I think it is. That's Department of Natural Resources here in eastern Washington. And what would you say about this kind of logging practice?
Well, this is the first I've seen it, and I don't know their objectives. I'm guessing what the habitat types are, what their challenges might have been. I don't know what the sale objectives are. Right. So it's a little challenging to critique when you're coming from a point of not being familiar with the exact property. Yeah. But just looking at it, we can see several things. One is, looking at the stumps, you can see the size of trees that they were going after. Those are fairly large cedar trees, very high value at this point. So obviously they were looking to make some profit from the sale. They have cut some younger trees as well, and that is probably because of the density that was on site. If you look to your over here to your left, you can see that what the forest was before they came in and cut. It is pretty dense, although in a cedar forest you would expect a fairly high density. So, and then the practice of leaving some trees. There's a fairly nice size mature cedar there. That would be an excellent seed source. And then there's some other species that they've left on the edges there. They have taken out most of the understory, and that, I would guess, is in part a response to creating greater resilience to wildfire. The piles will need to be burned. They certainly won't do that during the summer season, wildfire season, when an escaped spark could really cause a catastrophe. So they'll be burning these, I would guess, in the fall. And, you know, I haven't inspected the piles. I see some fairly good sized wood in there. I would question the utilization standards, because some of that wood could be used and not just burned. So I like to see us respectfully use the forest materials that we're cutting, those that are possible to be used. It doesn't look like they have a lot of soil in a pile, which is something that you look for. That would suggest that they were using machine piling and really pushing a lot of soil, which is very detrimental to the site. Not only do we have soil compaction, but we also see situations where we've got we're losing some of the fertility of the soil, the carbon sequestration potential of the soil, because we're shoving the topsoil into piles. I'm not saying that that's what's going on here. I haven't inspected that closely. But, you know, as a landscape architect, when I worked for the Forest Service for over 23 years, we call what they were doing here on this side of the road a Fulham strip, where they leave all of the trees and hope that that causes less visual contrast amongst and therefore more angst amongst people who visit the forest and expect to see what they view as a healthy forest. So, you know, I think they could have done a little better cleanup in this area. If you're going to be doing forest management, don't be sneaky about it. You know, if you're following a practice, do it. Put it on the land. And if people don't like it, then perhaps we need to look at why we did what we did. And so, anyhow, but it's certainly an improvement over the devastation that I've seen over the years, particularly in the 70s and the 80s. And that's what we're hoping for. You know, in Newfic, we emphasize forest restoration. We know that the exclusion of fire has really changed the dimensions and the dynamics of forests, and we're trying to move back to that. Well, I shouldn't even say move back to, because we don't retrogress. We move forward, but we look, how can we do things better? And we know that right now many of our stands are overstocked. It's because of repeated harvest as well as suppression of fire. And we want to reduce that stocking so there's less competition between the individual trees, and so that we have a little more resilience to drought. With climate change, we are seeing very dramatic changes in species composition and the health of our forest. And so we need to be wise enough to think ahead and how we can help those forests be more healthy, and how we can help protect forest soils so they maintain their productivity and their carbon sequestration potential.
Okay, we are now entering Hancock Forest Management. It's private land. It's land that they either bought from a private owner and are now devastating. And these are the products they're going to be spraying. Accord, which is glyphosate, Rotary, Emancipar, Oust, Escort, Bronx Max, and Crosshair, all very toxic products. And Hancock will deny that and say that, you know, they're not, but they kill plants, and they destroy their potential to uptake nutrients. So having said that, we're here to ask, are there better ways? Okay, Gloria, I'm asking you, what would you, if you were doing this kind of forest management, what would you use as opposed to those pesticides, I mean those herbicides that I just named?
I would use common sense. As we've walked into this unit that was cut probably a couple of years ago or more, there's plenty of openings. We've walked past no less than a dozen small trees that are already growing, some of them as high as 3 feet. Plenty of room. There's opportunities right here. We have a pile where a pile was burned here. That's an excellent place, as long as it didn't get too hot. Excellent place to plant. We've got some good char there, which is really great for the soil. So you could come in here and plant without spraying herbicide.
Look at the seedlings; those will all die, won't they? When they aerial spray.
Yeah.
So
yeah, everything goes, you know. And
yeah.
So if they also, you know, by leaving good seed sources, you know, there's a few decent trees they left, not a whole lot, but they're providing plenty of seed source. Look over here at this.
Yeah.
Right here. Why would you want to plant any denser than we already see right here? There's
Right.
lodgepole coming back in, very nice spacing. There's some nice larch over there, and it's Doug fir.
So all this will be affected by the spray, and many of these seedlings will probably die.
Well, they'll kill it all, and then they'll come back in and replant it. What sense does that make?
Yeah.
You know, and the effects of herbicides on the soil microbe community has not been fully explored. Many of these chemicals that are being used haven't even been tested. Some have, but they haven't been tested when they've been used in unison or used simultaneously or used adjacent to each other. We looked at the sign on the way in. What was that, 6, 7 different kinds of herbicides? And who has tested what happens when those herbicides are used together? None. The issue that we have about chemicals in the United States is that we test less than 8% of the chemicals that we produce. And we produce thousands and thousands of them. And we have no clue what they do when combined. We have no clue what they do when combined with prescription medication that people might already be taking. And we say, well, geez, we don't think it causes cancer. Well,
it does. The World Health Organization, yeah.
We know that, but when you say, well, you're not going to get cancer, oh, well, no, you just may become a celiac, unable to digest gluten, you may have vision problems, hearing problems, Alzheimer's, whatever. Don't just test for cancer alone. There's a lot of other maladies that people suffer from in increasing numbers, and we pretend that it's just natural to have these kinds of illnesses in this day and age. No, there's something else that's contributing to that. And I go by the precautionary principle. If you can't prove that it's safe, then don't use it.
Well, they've already proved it's not safe.
Exactly.
And,
so why are we doing this?
And also they've proved that when you aerial spray, the drift can go up to 5 miles.
Oh, yes.
Even longer. It depends how much wind there is. Even a 5-mile-per-hour wind can bring the drift to our communities, as well as the water. When it rains, it goes into the soil. There's little capillaries that then go to the lake, that join other streams and all that. So, yeah, I mean, this is a crime against nature, in my opinion. And I just hope that people contact Hancock Forest Management, the largest lumber company that is buying up private lands, and say, you can do better and you need to do better, and we are not going to buy from you.
The sad thing is this is so old-fashioned. This is so obsolete, this way of timber management, that it really startles me, frankly.
Yeah.
You would think that public land management and forest management on public lands is probably the slowest to adapt to new technologies, and yeah, probably. But then I look around and I see things like this, and it's like, where have they been for the past 20 or 30 years? Well, they've been
probably investing in Monsanto. You see all these companies invest in each other.
There's probably some symbiotic relationship there, but it's absolutely unnecessary. You could avoid the cost of manufacturing of those chemicals and the impacts that it has on the chemical workers. You could avoid the carbon footprint of transporting those chemicals, the carbon footprint of spraying those chemicals, the unintended consequences of the drift and the chemicals going places where they were not necessarily intended. What is the benefit?
Killing all these seedlings.
We have natural regeneration that is going to come in. You give this another 20 years and it'll be so thick you're going to have to thin it. So why are you interplanting more?
Yeah, right.
So it's no, I feel sorry for them because they clearly are caught in a paradigm that has been shown to be ineffective and no longer work. Why don't they go to the National Forest and start looking around? There's plenty of examples of excellent restoration work, natural regeneration that is in a healthy situation and not being depleted by chemicals.
Well, our
Mike,
family.
why don't you introduce yourself? You're just
Okay,
Mike.
I'm Mike Slater.
Okay.
Our family has been, logging and being good stewards of 400 acres of timberland here in eastern Washington. And we've logged the property probably 5 or 6 times over those 45 years. And improve the stand with good selective logging practices. And in some areas where disease has taken over and logging in the past has actually ruined the forest, clear cutting in small areas is probably okay, and replanting is okay. but on a large scale, Hancock is using one tool in their toolbox, and that is aerial spraying and clear cutting to make, in my opinion, just for profit. And
And how has these lumber companies impacted your property?
well,
You
they
mentioned
border.
yeah.
Hancock borders our property on two sides. On one side, they did aerial spraying and clear cutting. On the other side, we talked to them about not spraying so much because of our water system is below where they were spraying, and so they hand sprayed.
But only after you
I guess my
threatened.
opinion is like I said, we have logged our property many times, improved the stand, and without any need for spraying or any kind of herbicide of application on the land,
But
and things are doing just
not to
fine.
be repetitive, how does it look on the Hancock side after they're spraying?
Well, they sprayed, and
Does
after
it-
they sprayed, of course, the huckleberry patch that we had been going to was pretty much destroyed. It's coming back. Actually, picked some huckleberries
How many years?
out of it. 9 years
9 years.
later.
Okay.
So it does take quite a few years for all of that vegetation to come back. Meanwhile, their new seedlings are growing, but not any more than any of the seedlings on our property are growing. About the same
Interesting.
speed, and so, but they
Yeah.
think that their new seedlings can grow so much quicker without the competition of all of the plants they've killed.
Well, I'd like to just point out here that Dr. Huber from Purdue University, who is a very highly respected research scientist in this, agroscientist, he has examined how these chemicals work on the plants, and they literally make it so the plant can't uptake nutrients, and that's how it withers and dies. So it's also affecting, that's why when we eat foods that have Roundup on it or these kind of chemicals, we end up not being able to take up the nutrients as well. And so this is how they demineralize our forests.
And we were really upset too because the spraying takes place usually late July into August when the plants are at their highest peak, and so they can absorb more easily the herbicides. And that happens to be the same time that the bears and all the other animals are fattening up for the winter. They're eating those berries. They're in that environment day in and day out, and they must be affected. I mean,
Yeah, of
there's
course
gotta
they
be
are.
an effect on them.
Everything's affected, and to say it's not is just pure denial.
Right.
So thank you so
Okay.
much. Let's go and
You're very
see
welcome.
what Hancock has done.
Okay. When Forest Capital sprayed, Forest Capital sold the land to Hancock a few years ago. We noticed and documented that their spray actually killed the smaller ponderosa pine that were up 2 or 3 feet high, and that's kind of the dominant species in that south slope. So they're actually killing the trees with their spray and then coming back and replanting. They planted tamarack back in that area, which are doing okay, but meanwhile they killed off the many of the smaller pine trees, and I'm wondering the same thing might happen here too after the spray.
Sure. Yeah, they just want what they're the kind of tree they want to lumber.
Exactly.
So now we're looking at the Hancock's forest management practices, and this is what they do to their lands. They basically devastate it. And I'd like, Gloria, for you to comment on what alternative could have been here that might have been better in your opinion.
Well, there's probably 17 different forest practices they could have used that would have been better than this. I'm scratching my head as to why they're spraying here. I mean, they've devastated the land. They've removed the topsoil. They've compacted the soil. I mean, you look at the mess that is here. This isn't limited to the road. You can see the marks through the area here. And yeah, if you strip every bit of vegetation off a piece of land and then try to replant, the plants are going to struggle because they don't have their associated plants next to them. They don't have any shade. The soil micronutrients have been severely stressed and disturbed. And again, why are you spraying here? Where is this great competition that they claim is necessary? This is a crime. It's a crime against nature. It's a crime against future generations, and it's absolutely unnecessary. This is called how to turn healthy land into cash and walk away. It has nothing to do with sustainability. It has nothing to do with appropriate forest practices. And it's ridiculous that in this day and age we're still seeing this kind of so-called management.
And you know, it also is not friendly to the communities because the aerial spraying will go into our lake, Waits Lake below. The poisons will affect all of us. It's unnecessary, and it's just so ungenerous in spirit to the community at large.
Well, I don't think the community at large is a concern of theirs. That's
No,
part of the problem.
right. That's
the plant
problem.
community,
Yeah.
the human community,
Right.
and the microbial community, the mycelial community. I don't know.
And
of
the
one-
wildlife.
And the wildlife, obviously, the animal community. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure there's any community except their own
Right.
bankers and
Yeah.
their own pockets
Right.
that
Yeah.
is the motivator here.
So I'm asking everyone that sees this, please do your research. And even though Hancock is stamped as a certified sustainable lumber company, don't trust that label because unfortunately they can just pay for a label like that and fool you into believing that you're buying a good product. It's very important to buy from small logging companies because they are probably going to do the best job at this rate. And these big companies are just becoming too greedy, and we really need to send a message to them that they cannot do this. Mike, what do you have to say about this?
Well, this is pretty typical of what is going on with the larger timber companies. They're maximizing their profit by getting as much timber off of their lands as they possibly can in the shortest amount of time, so their investors can get a return on the timber. It's a you know it's a timber. I can't think of the word right now.
Yeah.
Investment, I guess you could say, timber investment organization. So people are investing in timber as a way to invest their money in the future, and they want to return as soon as they can.
Right.
And so this is what's happening out here in Washington.
Right.
And you got to remember, these people that are running the company are from Boston. They're not from the Pacific Northwest. And they cite the Sustainable Forestry Initiative as something that they espouse to, when really they're doing just the opposite. And they're not making our forests sustainable.
So on their site, you've gone to their site and you have read that they believe in sustainable forestry.
Oh, of course. Oh, yes.
Okay, so this is their idea, folks. On their website, if you go to Hancock Forest Management Company, you're going to see them expounding how they care about the environment and they care about the communities. They care about everything. And then you're going to see, here's the truth. Here is the truth. We are at their site here in Eastern Washington, Hancock Forest Management. This is their site. And so who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe a little reporter that comes out here with the local folk to bring the real truth to you? Or are you going to believe their fancy website? That's why we're here, to bring you the truth.
The truth is, part of the truth is that this is going to come back. It might take 50, 60 years. Maybe my grandchildren's kids will see this. It'll be a forest, maybe, at some point in the future. But in the meantime, we have the destruction of this habitat and the forest. And it'll never be a forest again as it was before, because of course a forest is a combination of aged trees, young trees, different species, and they're basically, when they're replanting one species of trees. So there'll be a same age forest, and we saw this on the Carpenter Road fire year before last, that where the fire burned through where they had planted their trees 7 or 8 years before, there was a crown fire, but the crown was only 15 feet high, and it took out every tree that they had planted, because there were no older trees that could withstand that kind of heat.
That's right. You know, when I was interviewing Julia Butterfly in Humboldt County many, many years ago, a logger was trying to prove to me how important it was to log and clear cut. And so we went on the top of the mountain, and there, sure enough, it was all fire devastation, but there was one green patch. And it looked like it was maybe 5 acres. And I said, how come that's still green? And he said, oh, that's an old growth. It didn't burn. And I thought, that's the proof right there.
Right.
If you leave the old growth trees intact, they're going to protect the forest from this heat generated by the debris below.
Sure. And most small loggers that make a living in this county will come back to an area and log it again 5 6 years later. That's how they make their living. They don't take every tree out the first time. They'll never come back to that area again to log. So, and logging is a very important economic aspect of our county. So we have to respect the people that are out doing it. The problem is that when somebody comes in with a big corporation that owns millions and millions of acres, and they want to make the bottom line the best they can, and this is what happens.
And they're taking jobs away from the smaller loggers that are actually doing a much better job.
And part of it, you know, is the mechanization of logging. You know, one log processor can come in like they did here and do the job that used to take 3 or 4 people to do, and now one person can do it. So automation's taken over even in the logging industry, and they can do it much more efficiently and quickly, and that's what's happening.
About prescribed fire?
Yes.
As
Why
a
don't you
tool
do
and
that
technique.
now?
Okay. One management technique that is biomimetic, that is, imitates nature, and that's really the kind of management techniques we want to use, is using prescribed fire as a way to clean up and prepare a site for better regeneration, much superior to spraying. But you know, the thing that I'm scratching my head about when I look at this is the prescribed fire wouldn't even carry in here. They've removed so much of the forest biomass, which is important to protect the forest floor and provide nursery and many other benefits. But you know, we in Newfit really advocate, as well as the Colville National Forest really advocates for using prescribed fire, because it's part of the natural cycle, and it really does a fabulous job of preparing a site to regrow a forest. And so
in order to have a prescribed fire, what ingredients do you need in that forest area?
that's a very complicated question.
Okay.
But let me try to if you can
Sure.
stop and then edit that. Actually, a very highly technical and scientific approach. It is not just go out and toss a match because you want to start a fire. The conditions that need to be present are sufficient fuel to carry the fire. The density of the existing forest has to be of a species and spacing that will carry fire through on the forest floor and not allow it to go up into the canopy. The diversity of fuels that are on the ground, and that's everything from a very large, what we call a 1,000-hour fuel, down to the very fine fuels that are flashy, that they'll just go instantly. So besides the physical components that you need to be present, and the topography has to be appropriate, where you can control that, where you can stop it at a certain point or be rather sure that it's not going to go beyond that point. And then there are a whole string of climatic conditions that need to exist, everything from the ambient moisture, what's going on in the atmosphere, where will the smoke go, how will it affect communities, and can we burn at a time when the smoke will be driven in a different direction, and then do you have sufficient resources? If there's already fires burning somewhere else, maybe a lot of your fire crew and your equipment is on that fire, in that wildfire, well, you're not going to turn around and start a prescribed fire. So there's really a very detailed plan that goes into determining whether or not a prescribed fire is appropriate, and if it's appropriate, how will it be applied, under what circumstances and what conditions, and those conditions have to be ripe and perfect before that match is lit. And so it's a complicated science, but done correctly, it has fantastic results.
Thank you. Yeah.
What is that? Is that a slide up there that happened, or is that?
No, that's the
cord?
mining company, Lang Mountain.
Oh, really?
And they mine.
Oh, that's Lane Mountain. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Lane Mountain.
What are they mining?
Sand and gravel. So you can see this is Hancock's idea of good forest management. And if they had their way all over the world, you can imagine what our world would look like. And as Gloria pointed out, I mean, here they want to spray, but there's really nothing to spray. It's already dead. Everything's dead. When I talked to Scott Ketchum, who is the supervisor of this program, he said they wanted to spray to stop.
Hear you. Stop up here.
Okay, so here we have a water source, a draw, as Gloria says, and they're going to be spraying right on this draw that eventually leads to the Colville River and Waits Lake, my lake, where I get my drinking water from. So why don't you point out what's going on?
There's a couple of problems that I see here. One is, if we look where we're standing, this is they've used a piece of equipment to come in here and push a ditch in to channel water off the road. As you can see, it's not functioning, but that is a collection point at the side of the road. And they were attempting to drain the water, which is full of sediment, off that road and going right into this wetland. And I'm looking for a culvert. There should be a culvert under the road. I don't see one immediately. But now let's step back and take a look at where the spray boundaries are.
Okay. This plastic bag, what is that?
These white plastic bags are used as markers so that the plane or helicopter that's spraying has a better visual on where they're expected to spray.
Okay.
And we turn around and we see this very rich, dense riparian area, a lot of species that love water. So we know that it's wet and typically wet year-round. We just saw standing water. But then we start to look for these plastic bags because, of course, we would not expect them to be spraying right in the waterway. But look, here's a plastic bag right here.
Right.
There's one there. You can see it goes along this way.
Yeah.
And then when you look on the other side of the drainage, you can see bags very close to the drainage. These are they've probably been measured, but can you really tell me that you can spray one side, spray this side, and not have anything drift into the waterway? That's absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I wasn't born yesterday.
Right. Right.
I understand spray and movement of air.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's very surprising that we would still be allowing these kinds of practices, much less consider them sustainable.
Well, here in the Department of DNR, Department of Natural Resources, in my opinion, is just beholden to the timber industry, as I witnessed last year in my video, Sacred Forest, where I invited a DNR public relations person from Eastern Washington, from Stevens County, and I asked them, is this good forestry practices? And he said, yes, it was, and it was just 3 buffer trees next to a fish-bearing stream. And, you know, so this kind of crime, this is all okay to the Department of Natural Resources. And I don't think they would have any problem with this. But I'm going to call them and ask them to come up here and look at this, because apparently Scott Ketchum told me they were beholden to the DNR.
Yes.
So that will be interesting to see.
Our rules, forestry rules, were written in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the larger timber companies, Weyerhaeuser and the others, and their lobbyists over in Olympia wrote the rules, and they apply for the whole state. So what's maybe good for the west side of the state, where 50, 60 inches of rainfall isn't the same rules that should not be the same rules that are followed over here, where we get maybe 15 inches if we're lucky of moisture a year. So they are following the rules as set down by the state, but there is no differentiation between the wetter side, west side, the drier east side.
There may be
So
one
this
in
is
there, but I couldn't see it.
a live stream you just
Yeah, there's running water.
Okay, so this is running water, folks, that goes down into our drinking water, our rivers, our lakes, and that's okay with the Department of Natural Resources. That's okay with Hancock Forest Management. Shame on them. And there's no one that is going to be able to influence them to do differently than ourselves, we the citizens. And we need to speak up. We need to let them know it's not okay. So just so that you can witness the water, it's trickling down. And this is the capillaries I spoke of earlier. And the capillaries are the ones that eventually feed the larger streams and end up in our lakes. So the devastation continues, folks, and only you can stop it by contacting Hancock Forest Management and letting them know you're not going to buy their products. And if you're a private landowner and you want to sell to a lumber company, make sure you sell to a lumber company that isn't going to devastate your land like this. Yeah, so why don't you talk about that, Gloria? There's an erosion.
Yeah, what we're looking at is another poor practice, and that is using equipment on steep slopes and removing all the vegetation. And so that's just, you can see it from here, open erosion. It will continue to erode, and I'm shocked. Things like that shouldn't be happening.
Well, that's compliments of Hancock forestry management practices, folks. Okay, so this is Hancock's signature of good forest practices management, as you can see. And Mike, you said you went on their website yesterday, and what did they have to say about?
Well, Hancock, they tout good forest management and sustainable. They're a member of the Sustainable Forest Initiative.
Oh my God, this is it, folks.
So
this is your Sustainable Forest Initiative right here. Huh? Ain't that something? Okay, yes, go on.
And they pretty much tout their great environmental concerns for wildlife and the future forests for our people. And in reality, this is what's happening over my shoulder in more and more areas of Eastern Washington. That's the reality of what's happening. You can go to the website, you can read all the good words about great sustainability and wonderful ability to regenerate forests for the future, and call them working forests and show how great they are. But this is what it really actually looks like in the field.
Okay. I just want you to understand, people that are watching and really care about our world, care about our forest, want to preserve a future for your children. This is
interesting.
what?
This is very interesting. There's a phone line here. Why would there be a phone line in a nice flat spot here? This doesn't look like a landing. It looks more like a place that maybe they would sell the land later and have some kind of a
Yeah, that's
dwelling.
what they do. That's what they do. And then people move in, and after they've devastated the forest like this, they move in, whereas people would love to have the forest to move into.
But,
I was scratching my head going,
Why would they put a phone up there? Well, because they're going to develop this area.
Yeah.
What they're doing now, not Forest Capital, but Hancock is doing, they're selling permits to hunt on their land now, all over Western Washington, now in Eastern Washington. So if you want to go on their land, there'll be a gate. You have accommodation to get on. You have to pay them so much to be on their land to hunt. So they're making every effort to make the biggest profit that they can from their lands.
But what bear is going to want to be in an area and a landscape like this?
well, it's you catch them when they're passing through.
Yeah.
Looking for their berries. They
Yeah.
just got herbicided in
Yeah,
the previous fall.
and all the berries
the deer
that they.
will follow the same paths that they have, even after the logging. They'll still come down the same way.
Yeah.
Go, well, it looks different here.
So, Gloria, why don't you comment now? If, let's say, Hancock Forest Management had contacted your organization and said, "Can you help us with a logging plan?" And it would be this area. What would you have recommended as opposed to this?
Well, first of all, stay off the steep slopes. If you look behind us here, you can see where they were dragging logs from the very top of the ridge down that steep slope, highly eroded, and then bringing it down this little road that's gray that I'm not seeing even any water bars on. And so this is just laying the land open.
What's a
for-
water bar?
A water bar is a ditch that's dug across a road that will direct the water off the surface of the road.
I
Otherwise,
see.
it'll run straight down the road.
Uh-huh.
There may be bars there. I'm not seeing them. But
Right.
we look around, and that other example that we saw, you just should not be operating on those steep slopes with a land-based system. You could put in a skyline or and what they call fly the logs, i.e. lift them up and bring them up by cable. But there's no road up there, and so it's probably not a suitable landing. They probably could have done it over there, but it looks like they just used
The cheapest way.
cheap and easy. And I certainly would have left a lot more vegetation. You know, there's a few cottonwood here and there, but which indicates a wet area, which is a little reason not to be running equipment back and forth over top
That
of
over
the
there
soil.
is a wet area.
That's also, soil compaction is a big problem. You don't want to compact the soil. It makes it far less productive and far more subject to erosion. And so what I'm seeing on that slope is I know from my days in the Forest Service that's absolutely unacceptable. That would never be done. It's just wrong.
You know, one other thing, this doesn't look like a wetland, so it doesn't look,
Right.
but if you notice, there's cottonwoods, there's maybe some
right.
aspen, so they grow in an area that
That is a wetland because my
And that
friend
is
used to
there.
swim there.
But,
yeah, and
but
there's-
we're
yeah.
talking about all the way.
all the
Yeah.
way through
It's
that it used to
Yeah.
be a giant sponge that would soak up the water to help the wetlands.
Well, that's a draw right there, and so they've devastated the draw.
Oh, that draw up there.
No, where that cottonwood is,
Yeah.
that draw right there between the mountains, that's a draw, and apparently,
Sure.
according to Tom, he used to
Oh, yeah.
swim in there, and so there's water in there,
Sure.
and it goes for quite a ways. So, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So comment on the waste of trees, because that's another thing that hurts. They could have left the trees standing
A lot more trees standing.
to provide shade.
Yes, and to protect the soils. Yeah, I'm just not sure of the philosophy or the intent here. There's, you know, when you're developing a timber management plan, you have a prescription, a silvicultural prescription, and you're looking at what's on the land, what you want the land to look like, what outcomes you want, not just outputs. But in looking at this, they're just looking at outputs. How many board feet can we get? Because the outcome is very poor. You know, by an outcome we mean wildlife. What's the wildlife habitat look like? What condition is the soil in? How much fuel is on the ground? You know, a whole range of factors. But what is the land going to look like, and what are its capabilities after you're gone? Is just as an important question, if not more important than what you are taking. And I'm just puzzled. I really don't understand, given the knowledge that we have now about appropriate forest management, why these kinds of practices are still being done. Now, I will say that were this not a wetland, yeah, you can clear areas. We're not saying that clearing areas always is bad, but when we start to move over there, when we drove past an incredible amount of slash left on the forest floor, and I'm not sure if they intend to burn that with a broadcast burn, or if they're going to pilot, or leave it. It's awfully dense for leaving, and would carry fire very quickly and very hot. So, but again, it's difficult to look at something and say, oh, I know what's wrong with it, or I know what to do better. But we see some indicators here, and certainly, you know, I don't know what their intent was on these lesser slopes, but you don't need to know the prescription to look at these steep slopes and the erosion that's already happening to know that it's the inappropriate thing to do.
Okay. Gloria, as a citizen who's seen this devastation and has taken a permacultural class, just a weekend class, and learning what permaculture can do as opposed to this kind of a thing, I'm very interested in getting Hancock to start employing permacultural practices. What's your idea on that?
Well, permaculture is a holistic design system, and so I think where we can really learn the most and find the applicability to forest management is looking at permaculture ethics. Permaculture ethics are care for the land, care for people, fair share the surplus, and apply self-regulation. And those ethics are really wonderful ethics to live by. You follow those and your life is going to be a lot more sustainable. What you do is going to be a lot more sustainable. And when we're, you know, as we've done this tour, we're hard pressed to say that they're following the ethic of caring for the land. When we look at the potential devastation in the watersheds as far as the sediment load and as far as spraying, as far as the visual disruptions and lack of aesthetics of what they're doing, and aesthetics are critically important to people, then we can't really say that we're noticing that they're caring for people. Now, they are supplying a product, but it's a product that can be supplied in a much more sustainable way, and we have a lot of examples of that. And certainly when we say apply self-regulation, I don't see evidence of that. And so yes, I think that if we look at sustainability through the lens of permaculture ethics, we could say that it would be really helpful if those were applied here.
Thank you. All right. Gloria, in the final note, why don't you tell us a bit about biochar, is it?
Yes, I'm glad you asked.
Okay.
Biochar is making charcoal with the express purpose of either repopulating it with biology by putting it in soil, or by remediating soil and water using charcoal to pick up the toxins that may be in that material, in the water, in the soil. And biochar is not a mystery. It is charcoal, but it's charcoal from a clean biomass, clean waste biomass, And one of the reasons where you see, or one of the intersections that you see with forest management, is that you can reduce the slash that you see on the forest floor and those slash piles into a valuable resource. When you put biochar back in the soil, it not only makes the soil more productive, also increases the carbon sequestration or increases the sequestration of carbon in the soil. And we call it sequestration, and rightly so, because it lasts for hundreds to thousands of years. And the way that we discovered the beauty of char in the soil was looking at the Amazonian soils. In the book 1491, we read about these huge cities that were along the Amazon River. And originally, the explorers that saw those cities were thought to be crazy, because it was believed there was no way you could possibly grow enough food to feed that many people concentrated in one area in a jungle, because jungles are notoriously poor soil. The surface of the soil has a lot of organic matter, and that grows a lot of stuff, but the soil itself is so leached of vital nutrients by the excessive rain that it really truly is not productive. But when soil scientists started talking to the archaeologists and noting that there were areas of dark soil, actually called terra preta, which in Portuguese means dark soils, they knew that they had these really rich, productive soils, but they didn't know why. They just thought they were anomalies. But when they started to compare notes, they saw that these anomalies were actually right along major travel routes and very near where there were suitable lands for habitation. And so what we've realized since is that by exploring these soils, digging soil pits, looking at the composition, that these are anthropogenic soils. They were created by people. And it was a combination of charcoal. We're sure they had compost, human manure, any kind of material that could break down would be put in the soil to make it more fertile. And those materials that couldn't break down through normal composting could be burned, and that created charcoal. That charcoal was added to the soil. The charcoal is still in the soil today, 2,500 years later, and that soil is still 5 times more productive than adjacent jungle soils. It's really a miracle that we finally figured out what nature's been up to. We see it in the Great Plains with the dark soils there. That's the result of thousands and thousands of years of little pieces of charcoal breaking off the charred root crowns of grasses and dropping into the soil, being worked in by buffalo, and over time sinking in. Fantastically productive soils. So one of the things that makes biochar so interesting and so effective is its surface area. It has a tremendous surface area, many pores. In 1 square centimeter of charcoal, you may have over thousands of square yards of surface area. That surface area is chemically and electronically active, and we call it a cation exchange capacity. Well, the charge that biochar has is a negative charge, and water and nutrients have positive charges, so they are drawn to the biochar. So biochar becomes these little storage units that attracts moisture and nutrients, and it holds that but makes the nutrients bioavailable to plants. The bonds that hold the nutrients to the char are weak enough that plants can draw off the nutrients that they need. Those pores also provide habitat for microbes, mycelia, and microbes need protection from other predators in the soil. But the fascinating thing is these microbes are bringing minerals and nutrients forward and holding them. The plants, the root hairs come down and essentially say, hey, I'll trade you these sugars and carbohydrates for your nutrients. So you have a material that attracts and holds nutrients in water, reduces your irrigation needs by up to 30%, increases your productivity, and does a whole lot of other wonderful things. I urge everybody to check out the U.S. Biochar Initiative. That's on the web at www.biochar-us.org.
All right, and that would be another thing that Hancock could do, working with a group like yours, is using all that excess slash that we saw as a biocharge.
As a source for
Yeah,
biochar. There's a way to burn. Top lighting a pile, you can maximize your production of biochar, spread it on the soil, improve your productivity, and you don't need to spray herbicides.
Well, thank you so much. That's great to know. Okay.
So in the production of biochar, if you use a pyrolysis oven, which pyrolysis means that you're applying heat in the absence of oxygen to bake something. And so you can use pyrolysis, gasification, or good old combustion to create charcoal, or biochar in this case. And so you can get heat from that process, which can turn a turbine and a generator and therefore produce electricity. You can take that heat, run it through a greenhouse. You can use biochar in place of peat and perlite and vermiculite. And so it's helpful in horticulture applications. And biochar is also great for use in livestock management. You can use it to feed it to chickens, to ruminants. Feeding a biochar to ruminants, and only 1% by volume of their normal ration of food, can reduce their methane outputs by 50%. That's huge, because methane is 95 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So there is a whole host of benefits of biochar. I use it in my chicken litter. I do feed it to my animals, my chickens. I put it in my chicken coop. It virtually eliminates odors in the chicken coop while it's absorbing nitrogen, ammonia, and those associated nitrates, so it becomes a fertilizer. Straight biochar unamended is called a soil amendment. It is very good for propping open the lenticels in clay soil to make the soil more fluffy, or adding tilth, as we call it.
Would that be ash be included?
No, ash is not included.
So it
We are
has to
talking
be
about
like
the char.
charcoal from, let's say you've
Yeah,
had a
it's-
wood fire, you could collect the charcoal from that wood fire.
As long as you were using clean materials to burn. Material like wood that has preservatives in it, absolutely
No,
not.
no.
Other chemically treated wood, municipal
has to
solid
be
waste.
just
it has to be good, clean
debris
biomass.
wood, yeah.
And waste biomass. We
Yeah.
don't want to see people growing plantations of
Right.
trees and
Yeah.
shrubs and then cutting it down to
Right,
burn.
yes.
No, bad idea.
No, right.
Waste. We have so much waste
Yeah.
biomass, as we saw
That's right.
today
Yes.
on our tour.
Yeah.
And so I'm working with the Forest Service now.
Yeah.
The Colville National Forest is very interested in learning how to use conservation burn techniques on their slash piles to create the maximum amount of charcoal. The other beautiful thing is when you top light a pile, that you significantly reduce the smoke to almost zero if your material is dry, because the heat draws the gases up into the flames rather than releasing it as smoke.
So those slash piles we saw on the side of the road in the beginning of this tape, that would be a good example of a burn?
They'd be perfect to use
Okay.
for creating biochar.
So, well, that's very interesting. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. This is Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, and thanks for watching.